In 1967, during the Vietnam War, the US military made it rain. Not metaphorically, literally. They seeded clouds. They flooded trails. They turned the sky into a weapon. One mission dumped 9 inches of rain in just 4 hours. And they called it Operation Popeye. That was over 55 years ago, before GPS, before satellites, before smartphones. If they could weaponize the weather with 1960s tech, what do you think they can do now? Let's go back to the start. Operation Popeye was launched in secret. The goal? Extend the monsoon season over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, disrupting enemy supply lines. Pilots flew into clouds with silver iodide flares, deploying them like airborne saboteurs. The Pentagon reported that 82% of seeded clouds produced rain. And in one instance, it rained so hard that an American Special Forces camp recorded 9 inches of rain in 4 hours. The jungle turned to swamp, roads washed out, trucks stuck in rivers of mud. Weather became a weapon, and it worked. In 1974, the operation was exposed in Senate hearings. It shocked the public, and it embarrassed the Pentagon. Congress was furious. The international community was even more stunned. By 1977, the United Nations signed the ENMOD Treaty, banning weather modification for hostile purposes. But here's the part they never really talk about. That was half a century ago, and we've come a long way since dry ice and flare racks. What was once experimental is now operational. What was once top secret is now quietly permitted. And if you think modifying the weather is risky for politics or the environment, wait until you hear what it's doing to your body, to animals, and to the food we grow. Because weather might be weaponized, but it's what falls from the sky that stays with us. We'll get to that. But first, before the planes flew, before the skies were seeded, someone had to file the patents, and they did. Before the sky was a battlefield, it was a filing cabinet. Because long before the first rain was forced from the clouds, inventors were lining up at the US Patent Office with blueprints to control the weather. And some of them succeeded. Patent 2,968,123, granted in 1961, outlines a method for dispersing substances into the atmosphere to modify cloud formation and weather conditions. It doesn't just suggest it's possible, it lays out exactly how to do it. And it wasn't alone. Over the decades, the US Patent Office has approved hundreds of weather-related patents, rainmakers using aircraft, devices for atmospheric ion manipulation, systems to weaken hurricanes, even methods to induce snow in dry regions. All filed, all real, all searchable. Patent 3,636,252 describes a system for combating drought by releasing artificial condensation nuclei into clouds. Patent 5,441,200 theorizes a method to disrupt tropical cyclones using temperature differentials. These aren't science fiction plots. These are legally recognized intellectual properties. And then there's this. In 1991, a patent titled Stratospheric Welsbach, Seeding for Reduction of Global Warming, proposed spraying reflective particles into the upper atmosphere to reflect sunlight away from Earth, essentially using aerosolized materials to geoengineer the planet. Sound familiar? Because in 2023, scientists at Harvard and a company called Make Sunsets proposed the same thing. Only this time, they actually did it. They launched weather balloons into the stratosphere filled with sulfur dioxide, not as a proof of concept, as a product. They literally started selling cooling credits based on how much sunlight their particles were designed to reflect. No permits, no global vote, no ethical oversight. Just launch. And while mainstream scientists criticized the experiment, the FAA did not stop them. Why? Because there were no laws that said they couldn't. So now, we're not just modifying clouds, we're modifying the planet's heat budget, privately, commercially, in plain sight. And here's what makes it all so slippery. Because cloud seeding is real, because geoengineering patents exist, because the US military has openly experimented on the sky, you also get a fog of noise. Misinformation, misinterpretation, disinformation. And that makes it easy for skeptics to dismiss any real concerns as conspiracy, even when they're backed by declassified documents, peer-reviewed research, and international treaties. But let's stay grounded. This documentary isn't about the theories, it's about what's on paper, what's in the air, and what's being done right now, with or without your knowledge. And if you think these patents are just gathering dust, think again, because governments aren't the only ones experimenting anymore. Private firms, tech bros, startups, they've picked up where the Pentagon left off, and they're doing it with no vote, no transparency, and in some cases, no accountability. We'll meet one of them later. But first, let's jump into what's happening in the world today, where cloud seeding is now a service and weather is a product. So, we've followed the paper trail. From classified military ops to publicly filed patents, we've seen how cloud seeding and weather control went from secret to sanctioned. But what about now? Because today the sky isn't just being studied, it's being managed. All over the world, governments and private companies are modifying the weather in real time. Not just for war, but for business, for agriculture, and in some cases, for show. Let's start with the United Arab Emirates. The UAE is one of the driest countries on Earth, but they've turned weather modification into policy. Their government operates an ongoing national cloud seeding program, with dozens of missions flown each year. Using small aircraft, they deploy salt flares and hygroscopic particles into low humidity clouds to encourage rainfall. And guess what? It works. Rainfall in seeded areas has increased, in some cases by up to 30%, but it hasn't been all good news. In 2022, parts of the UAE experienced unexpected flash flooding just days after a large-scale seeding operation. Officials denied a connection, but the timing raised questions. Because cloud seeding isn't precise. It doesn't create perfect rain. It creates more rain, and sometimes too much. Now let's talk about China. In 2008, Beijing modified the weather ahead of the Olympic Games to ensure clear skies. They launched rockets into the clouds and seeded them early, triggering rain before the events began. In effect, they vacuumed the sky dry, and it worked. Since then, China has scaled its program massively. They've deployed tens of thousands of weather modification missions, especially in regions like Tibet and Xinjiang. By 2025, China announced plans to create artificial rain systems covering over 5 million square kilometers, an area larger than India. And here's where it gets tricky. Weather systems don't obey borders. So when China triggers rain in one province, what happens to the weather downstream? Does it rob rain from neighboring countries? Does it push drought or floods into someone else's farmland? There are no international laws regulating this, which brings us to the United States. In the western U.S., states like Colorado, Utah, and Idaho are cloud seeding regularly, especially during droughts. Agencies work with water boards and irrigation districts to enhance snowpack and refill reservoirs. In 2023, Colorado alone logged over 150 seeding missions, and private companies like Weather Modification Incorporated and North American Weather Consultants are contracted to do it. But here's the thing. Most people living in these areas have no idea it's happening. It's legal, it's state-funded, but it's not widely publicized. And while some of these efforts have clear benefits, more rain for crops, more snow for ski resorts, they also raise some uncomfortable questions. Who decides when it rains and where? What happens if too much rain falls? What happens when two regions both want the same clouds? Because as the climate crisis escalates, weather isn't just survival, it's leverage. Control the clouds and you control the crops. Control the crops and you control the market. Now imagine a world where companies, and not just governments, start offering this as a subscription service. Need rain for your vineyards? There's an app for that. Want to stop hail from ruining your car lot inventory? Just pay the monthly fee. Sounds futuristic? It's already happening, and it's only going to grow. But there's a line, a place where helpful turns harmful. And if we're already seeing cloud seeding backfire in dry countries, what happens when we modify the sky over places that are already soaked? Because not all weather is welcome. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come. In 1967, during Operation Popeye, cloud seeding involved a guy in a bomber jacket flying into a storm with a flare gun and some bags of silver iodide strapped to his plane. Crude, risky, manual. But somehow, it worked. Fast forward to today, We're not just flying into storms, we're flying above them, around them, and sometimes through satellite-linked drones programmed by AI. What was once improvisation is now automation. Let's break it down. Today's cloud seeding missions often use unmanned aerial vehicles, drones fitted with precision nozzles that spray hygroscopic salts into pre-identified cloud bands. The clouds are mapped and targeted by machine learning models trained on years of atmospheric data. Pilots aren't guessing anymore. They're following scripts, generated by neural nets that predict cloud behavior, rainfall potential, and storm trajectories in real time. And these models, they're fed by a network of sensors, satellites, and radar feeds, many of which operate independently from any national weather service. We're not talking weather forecasting anymore. We're talking weather scripting. And then there's geoengineering, the next frontier. Scientists around the world are experimenting with stratospheric aerosol injection, ocean brightening, and cloud thinning, all designed to cool the planet by manipulating sunlight, cloud coverage, or heat absorption. In 2022, a company called Make Sunsets launched unauthorized weather balloons into the stratosphere, filled with sulfur dioxide, the same compound used in volcanic eruptions to reflect sunlight. They weren't testing, they were selling. Customers could buy cooling credits on their website, claiming they were offsetting global warming, one balloon at a time. Think about that. Private actors are now conducting planetary experiments for profit, without global consent, without peer review, and without knowing what the long-term effects might be. And if you think the US government wouldn't allow that, well, they didn't stop it. Because right now, there's no legal structure for any of this. No public hearings, no environmental impact studies, just launch and hope. And while the headlines focus on climate targets and innovation breakthroughs, what's not being talked about is this. What are these technologies doing to us? We've talked about the machines, we've talked about the models, but we haven't talked about the bodies, human, animal, or plant, living under all this modified sky. In the next segment, we go there, because some of what falls from the sky isn't just rain. It's chemicals, particles, and compounds that weren't there before, and nobody really knows what they do once they hit the ground. So far, we've talked about who controls the weather. Now we need to talk about what comes down with it, because when clouds are seeded with chemicals, when particles are released into the sky, when the atmosphere is altered on purpose, it's not just the weather that changes, it's the world beneath it. Let's start with the basics. The most common cloud seeding agents used globally are silver iodide, potassium chloride, calcium chloride, and sometimes dry ice. These substances are meant to create artificial condensation, encouraging rain or snow. They're released by flares, rockets, or sprayed directly from planes. Sounds technical. But here's the question. What happens when they fall back down to Earth? Because rain doesn't just fall on empty fields. It lands on our skin, on the vegetables we eat, on the rivers we drink from, on the animals we raise. And while most official agencies claim silver iodide is safe in small quantities, what they don't really talk about is what happens when it's used persistently, year after year, over entire regions. Human health concerns. The EPA classifies silver iodide as a hazardous substance. In high doses, it can cause thyroid dysfunction, respiratory irritation, damage to internal organs, skin discoloration, a condition called argyria. Now, is cloud seeding using enough of it to do that? The official line is no, but independent research is limited and in some cases completely absent. And here's the issue. Cloud seeding doesn't happen once. It happens repeatedly, sometimes hundreds of times a year in a single area. So what happens when that exposure accumulates? What happens when it bioaccumulates in food, in soil, in groundwater? And what about the other compounds, like barium salts and aluminum oxide, used in more experimental programs tied to military or private research? There are reports, some credible, some not, of regions experiencing higher levels of chronic fatigue, skin irritation, respiratory illness, allergic reactions after intense atmospheric spraying events. Now, we're not saying cloud seeding caused it all, but we are saying this. No one's really checking. And if they are, they're not publishing it. Impact on animals and livestock. Let's shift to the food chain. If these particles fall on grazing fields, what happens to livestock? Studies in China and India have raised concerns about silver accumulation in animal tissue. In some regions with heavy seeding activity, Farmers reported decreased fertility in cattle, lower milk yields, increased birth defects. Again, hard to confirm, because there's been no systematic, peer-reviewed, long-term study on livestock exposed to seeded rainfall, but anecdotal data continues to grow, and when you look at patterns in cloud seeding zones, the questions keep coming. Crops and soil fertility. What does repeated cloud seeding do to soil? Silver iodide and salts can alter pH levels in the ground. Over time, this affects microbial health, root systems, nutrient absorption. In plain English, you grow less food or lower quality food. There's also evidence that excessive seeding may alter rainfall intensity, leading to more runoff, less soil saturation, higher erosion rates. So instead of nurturing the land, you might be washing it away. Ecosystem effects. Bees, birds, amphibians. These are early warning systems for environmental collapse. And in several cloud seeding regions, especially in Asia and the Middle East, researchers have documented decreased pollinator activity, changes in insect migration, algae blooms in lakes post-seeding, which raises the final question. If the effects are this unclear, why are we still spraying? Lack of long-term study. The truth is there is no global safety standard for weather modification. There's no unified study tracking health outcomes, soil chemistry, crop yields, animal reproduction. Most cloud seeding programs are self-reported, most data stays in-house, and most of it is not peer-reviewed, so the world keeps modifying the sky without fully understanding what's falling from it. This isn't about panic. This is about transparency. Because if governments and companies want to change the weather, we have the right to know what's in the rain. And maybe, just maybe, before we seed another cloud, we should stop and ask, what are we really growing? And here's another question most people never ask. You think you're buying organic food? Free range? All natural? Rain-fed? What happens when that rain isn't natural? When the soil it lands on has been chemically altered for a decade? When the very sky above that organic farm is filled with particles that no one told you about? It doesn't matter what the label says. If the rain is tainted, the food is too. In the next segment, we're jumping to the modern United States, where a startup led by a 25-year-old tech bro flew over Texas, and days later, the state was underwater. Is this coincidence or the rise of private weather control? In early July 2025, the Texas Hill Country was hit by historic floods. Roads became rivers, homes were submerged, and communities were devastated. 2 days before that disaster, a startup called Rainmaker flew a cloud seeding mission over the same region. The man behind the company? Augustus Doricko, just 25 years old and a recipient of a $100,000 Thiel Fellowship. Doricko dropped out of UC Berkeley to launch Rainmaker, a tech startup aimed at stewarding the natural world by triggering rain in places that need it. He admits the flight took place on July 2nd, but says seeding halted before the storm systems formed. He insists the seeded clouds dissipated long before the flash flood struck. That may be true, Matt, but here's the bigger picture that was never mentioned. Rainmaker wasn't funded by NASA. It wasn't funded by NOAA. It was funded, indirectly, by Peter Thiel, the billionaire behind Palantir, the surveillance technology giant linked to U.S. defense and intelligence. So the real questions are, why is a Thiel-backed project now modifying weather in Texas? Where are the permits? Where are the environmental assessments? And above all, who's accountable when private flights manipulate the sky? The truth is, no one seems to know. No federal oversight, no public audits, no independent verification. And it's not just about this one incident. It's a symptom of a larger shift. When billionaire-backed tech startups start to touch the weather, we're no longer talking about agricultural aid or drought relief. We're talking about privatized climate intervention. That raises serious concerns, especially when it rains where only they decide it should. We regulate food. We regulate medicine. We regulate how loud your lawnmower can be on a Sunday, but we don't regulate who controls the clouds above your head. Ask yourself, if billionaires and governments can change the weather, what can't they change? We've come a long way since Operation Popeye, Back then, it took military planes, silver iodide, and classified missions to turn the sky into a battlefield. Today, it takes a drone, a few permits, and a startup pitch deck. The weather has become programmable, not just by governments, but by corporations, contractors, and billionaire-backed technologists. And here's the uncomfortable truth. There are no international laws governing this. Sure, the NMOD Treaty bans weather modification as a weapon, but it only applies to warfare, and even then it's vague. There are no binding limits on commercial or experimental weather interventions, no unified global code, no standardized reporting requirements, just a handful of local agencies, and in some cases, nothing at all. So when a country like China seeds clouds to boost agriculture, or the UAE floods the desert with artificial rain, or a startup like Rainmaker flies over Texas just days before historic flooding, there's no accountability because there's no rulebook, not for safety, not for ethics, not even for consent. And here's where it gets even darker. Weather control may have started with good intentions, agriculture, drought relief, climate research. But once you control the skies, you can control food, energy, insurance markets, election turnout, supply chains, migration patterns. If it sounds dystopian, it's because it is, but it's also real. And you weren't asked. There was no vote, no town hall, no referendum on modifying the biosphere we all depend on. Just tech companies, and trillion-dollar defense contracts, and billionaires selling cooling credits to the same industries heating the planet. And if you think this ends with clouds, wait until they start selling weather immunity packages. Flood insurance bundled with storm suppression, VIP rain coverage for your farm, premium snow for your ski resort while the town next door dries up. You think it's far-fetched? So was rain on command until they made it rain. So was geoengineering until they launched sulfur balloons. So was private weather control until they got funded. This isn't about fear. This is about foresight. Because the skies above us belong to all of us. But if we don't pay attention, they'll be leased out, one cloud at a time. It's no longer a question of if we can control the weather. It's who controls it, and who gets left in the storm. This is how about that. And the forecast? Heavily manipulated, with a chance of denial.
Curiosity calls, we show you the facts. How about that? Don't let the mystery lack. We'd love to hear from you. You know the rules, it's true. The golden words are like and comment and subscribe to. We love to hear from you. You know the rules, it's true. The golden words are like and comment and subscribe to. Curiosity calls, we've shown you the facts. How about that? Don't let the mystery lack. Don't let the mystery lack. Curiosity calls, we've shown you the facts. How about that? Don't let the mystery lack. But if you want more, then you know what to do. All you gotta do is hit that button. Join us next time for the tales we tell. Curiosity calls.